I stood on my own front porch clutching my two grandchildren's trembling hands while my husband of 39 years slid divorce papers toward me. Beside him, a woman young enough to be our daughter crossed her arms and smirked as though victory already belonged to her. "Start packing," she said. "This house has no space for a freeloader." I looked from her polished smile to my husband's hollow eyes. Less than an hour earlier, I had learned I had inherited $26 million and an office tower in Manhattan. The news still rested inside my handbag in a thick envelope neither of them had noticed. Instead of breaking down, I smiled. "What is so amusing?" she snapped. I drew a slow breath, held her gaze and answered. "Actually, this house belongs to." But before I explain what happened next, you should understand how an ordinary 61-year-old grandmother ended up standing on that porch with the biggest secret of her life resting quietly against her hip. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, though nearly everyone calls me Ellie. If you had encountered me the week before all this unfolded, you probably would not have given me a second glance. I worked 3 mornings a week at the public library in our small town in Putnam County, New York. I loved helping children discover new books and retirees find fresh authors to enjoy. It was not glamorous work, but it gave my days a quiet sense of purpose. For 39 years, my husband Harold and I had built what I believed was a respectable life together. We had not started with much. Our very first apartment had a leaking faucet, a refrigerator that hummed loudly all night, and exactly 2 folding chairs that served as our entire dining set. Harold had dreamed of running his own construction firm, and I believed in that dream enough to work double shifts at a dental office while he got the business off the ground. There were years when I balanced the books late at night after tucking our children into bed. Years when I went without a new winter coat because the company needed another delivery truck. Years when I smiled through worry so Harold would never lose his nerve. Eventually the business flourished. People praised him as a self-made success story. I never corrected them. That was not because I craved recognition. Marriage, I always believed, was not supposed to keep score. At least that is what I told myself for nearly 4 decades. Our daughter Claire was now 37, raising 2 remarkable children after a painful divorce of her own. Money was perpetually tight for her, but she never complained. She worked tirelessly as an occupational therapist and somehow still found the energy to bake for every school bake sale. Our son Daniel was 34 and taught American literature at a public high school. He adored his students the way genuinely great teachers always do. He often joked that literature was never really about the words on the page. It was about the choices characters made when nobody was watching. I found myself thinking about that sentence often after everything changed. On the morning my life turned upside down, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I reshelved books until noon, chatted with Mrs. Whitcomb about a thriller she had just finished, and laughed with a young boy who proudly announced he had finally conquered his first chapter book. Around 1 in the afternoon my cell phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. Normally I let unknown callers go straight to voicemail, but something urged me to answer. "Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield," a calm man's voice asked. "This is she. My name is Jonathan Pierce. I am an estate attorney based in Manhattan. I am calling regarding your great-aunt, Margaret Ashworth." I nearly dropped the phone. "My great-aunt Margaret?" "Yes, ma'am." I had not seen Aunt Margaret in years. She was one of those fascinating relatives children whispered about at holiday dinners. She had never married, wore extravagant hats even in mild weather, and had somehow transformed real estate investments into an extraordinary fortune. Family rumor claimed she owned buildings scattered across New York City, though nobody seemed entirely certain how many. She had gradually withdrawn from family gatherings after my grandmother passed away. Life had simply drifted us apart. "I am afraid you have reached me far too late," I said quietly. "We have not spoken in years. I am sorry to inform you that Miss Ashworth passed away 3 weeks ago." I closed my eyes. Even when someone has lived a long, full life, death still lands with unexpected weight. "I am sorry to hear that. There is, however, another reason for my call." He paused. "You have been named the principal beneficiary of her estate." For several seconds, I genuinely believed he had mistaken me for another Eleanor Whitfield. "There must be some error." "There is no error." He explained the will had been reviewed multiple times, every legal requirement thoroughly satisfied. Then he calmly listed what Aunt Margaret had left me. $26 million. A historic office tower in Midtown Manhattan. majority control of a charitable foundation she had established decades before. I could not speak. The library around me seemed to fade into silence. Finally I whispered, "Why me?" "I am afraid I cannot fully explain that over the phone. Miss Ashworth left a personal letter that may clarify her decision. We would like you to visit our office tomorrow morning." I leaned against a bookshelf because my knees suddenly felt unsteady. "There is one request." "Anything. Until ownership transfers are finalized, we would appreciate complete confidentiality." "You have my word." After we ended the call, I simply stood there staring at rows of spines on the shelf. $26 million. The figure did not even seem real. Oddly, I was not thinking about vacations or jewelry or luxury cars. My first thought was Claire. She would never again have to worry about a mortgage payment. My second thought was Daniel. His classroom constantly needed supplies teachers usually purchased themselves. Then I thought of Harold. Perhaps this was finally our chance to slow down together. We had traveled so little during our marriage. There were national parks we had always talked about visiting. Small fishing villages along the coast of Maine. Autumn drives through the Berkshires. Perhaps life was handing us one final, beautiful chapter. I finished my shift a few days later before driving to collect my grandchildren, Grace and Owen, from elementary school. The moment they climbed into my car, all my worries momentarily disappeared. "Grandma," Owen announced proudly, "I got 100 on my vocabulary quiz." Grace rolled her eyes. "He already told 3 people." "I got 100, he repeated. "I heard you," I laughed. On the drive home, they bickered over whose turn it was to pick the radio station, then begged for ice cream. I promised we would celebrate soon. Neither child realized I was silently imagining paid-off college tuition. Futures already secured. Burdens lifted before they even knew such burdens existed. As we pulled into my neighborhood, I noticed something unusual. 2 gleaming luxury SUVs sat parked in my driveway. Neither belonged to Harold. An uneasy feeling settled into my stomach. "Grandma," Grace asked softly. "Everything is fine, sweetheart." But somehow I already knew it was not. The moment I stepped out of the car, the afternoon felt unnaturally still. Even the birds seemed hushed. Grace slipped her small hand into mine. Owen reached for my other hand without saying a word. Children possess a remarkable instinct. They often sense trouble long before adults are willing to admit it exists. Harold stood on the front porch. He was not alone. Beside him stood a woman I had never met in person, though I recognized her instantly from photographs I had accidentally stumbled across months earlier on social media. She was tall, impeccably dressed, probably somewhere in her mid-30s, with sleek dark hair and the confident posture of someone thoroughly accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Her name was Cassandra Reyes. She was one of the top commercial real estate agents in northern Putnam County. I had heard neighbors mention her more than once. I had also seen her name appear on Harold's phone often enough for it to settle uncomfortably in the back of my mind. I had asked him once, "Who is Cassandra?" Without glancing up from his dinner plate, he had answered, "Commercial property agent. She is assisting one of my clients." I had accepted the explanation. After 39 years of marriage, trust becomes less of a conscious decision and more of an ingrained habit. Now I wished I had questioned that habit far sooner. Several cardboard boxes were stacked beside the porch steps. My potted geraniums had been shoved aside to make room for them. One box actually had my name scrawled across the top in thick black marker. Ellie, not Mom, not Honey, simply Ellie. It struck me as colder than anything either of them could have said aloud. Harold folded his arms. "You are finally here." His voice sounded almost transactional. "I live here," I answered quietly. Cassandra offered the kind of polite smile that never once reaches the eyes. "I suppose we should get this over with." My heart began pounding harder. I glanced at my grandchildren. "Kids, why don't you wait by the car for just a minute?" "No," Owen whispered. "I want to stay with you." Harold sighed impatiently. "They do not need to hear this." "Then perhaps you should not have chosen today." He looked away. That small gesture wounded me more than shouting ever could have. Cassandra stepped forward carrying a manila envelope. Inside were several neatly organized documents. She extended them toward me. Harold did not. She did. That alone revealed more about my marriage than any conversation ever could. "These are the divorce papers," Harold said. Just like that. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of 39 years together, only bare facts. I filed several months ago. I stared at him. Several months. I wanted everything prepared before we talked. Prepared. Such an efficient word for dismantling an entire life. When exactly were you planning to tell me? When the timing made sense. I nearly laughed. Timing. I had spent decades arranging my entire life around his timing. Waiting until construction season slowed. Waiting until business improved. Waiting until retirement. Apparently I had waited far too long. Cassandra slipped her arm through Harold's. The gesture was not affectionate. It was possessive. I think honesty is healthier than pretending, she said. Her perfume drifted toward me, expensive and overwhelming. Harold remained silent. She continued speaking as though she had every right to. The truth is, Harold has outgrown this marriage. I looked at him. Is that how you feel? He hesitated only briefly. Yes. One word. 39 years erased by a single syllable. I noticed Grace quietly wiping tears from her cheeks. Owen pressed himself closer against my side. My heart broke not for myself but for them. Children should never have to witness adults behaving this way. I crouched beside them. Would you two do Grandma a favor? They nodded. Mrs. Alvarez is probably out gardening next door. Go ask if you can wait with her for a few minutes. I do not want to leave you, Grace whispered. I smiled as gently as I could manage. I will be right there. Mrs. Alvarez had known our family for nearly 28 years. The instant she saw the children's faces, she hurried across her lawn. Ellie, could they stay with me for a little while? She looked from me to Harold, then to Cassandra. Her expression hardened. Of course. She took each child by the hand. As they walked away, Owen glanced back over his shoulder. I love you, Grandma. I love you more. Only after they disappeared inside Mrs. Alvarez's house did I turn back toward my husband. Cassandra let out a dramatic sigh. Now that the audience is gone. She crossed her arms. I will be honest. I was not expecting anything less. She smiled. Good. Then she looked directly at me. You have been living off Harold for years. I blinked. Living off Harold. I had balanced his books, answered his business calls at all hours, skipped vacations because payroll always came first, sold my grandmother's silver to keep his company afloat during the recession. Yet somehow I was the burden. She was not finished. You are old enough to understand when it is time to move on. Harold still said nothing. She gestured toward the boxes. We packed the essentials. The essentials, as though 39 years could possibly fit inside 7 cardboard boxes. Buy photographs? I asked. Harold shifted uncomfortably. They are in storage. My grandmother's china. We did not think you would need it. Need it? That china had survived 3 generations. Apparently memories no longer qualified as necessities. Cassandra gave an exaggerated shrug. You can always buy new dishes. I looked at Harold one final time, hoping, genuinely hoping, to catch some flicker of the man I had married. Instead I saw only exhaustion. Cowardice, perhaps even relief. I never wanted this to turn ugly, he muttered. You brought another woman to our front porch. I know. No, I said softly. You do not. Cassandra seemed bored by the exchange. She glanced at her watch. Can we please finish this? She pointed toward the front door. You need to collect whatever is left and leave before dinner. I said nothing. She mistook my silence for surrender. Then she smiled wider. Start packing. She tilted her head ever so slightly. This house has no space for a freeloader. The words hung suspended in the warm summer air. Mrs. Alvarez, standing behind her living room window, gasped loudly enough that I heard it from across the yard. Harold closed his eyes for a brief moment. Even he seemed embarrassed, yet he still did not defend me. That was the exact moment something inside me grew strangely calm. Not cold, not furious, simply calm. Because when people finally reveal exactly who they are, confusion evaporates. All that remains is clarity. I felt the thick envelope inside my purse. The attorney's letter, the inheritance documents, $26 million, an office tower, an entirely new future waiting only a train ride away. Neither of them knew. Neither of them suspected. And somehow that secret made their cruelty feel smaller. I looked at Cassandra, then at Harold, then back at the house we had purchased together decades earlier. Finally I smiled. It was not a bitter smile. It was not triumphant. It was the smile of someone who had just realized she was not the one losing everything. Cassandra frowned. What is so funny? I held her gaze. Then I answered in the calmest voice I had used all day. Actually. I nodded toward the front door. This house belongs to me. Harold laughed first. A short, dismissive laugh. Cassandra joined him almost immediately. Oh, that is adorable, she said. You really are in denial. I shook my head. No. Then I looked directly at Harold. Do you remember the recession 14 years ago? His smile faded. When the construction company was nearly forced into bankruptcy. He did not answer. You were terrified creditors would seize the house. Now the color slowly drained from his face. I signed every document your attorney placed in front of me, I continued. One of them transferred the deed into my name to protect the property while your business recovered. Cassandra looked from him to me. What is she talking about? Harold's mouth opened but no words emerged. You always said we would transfer it back once things stabilized, I said gently. We never did. Silence settled heavily over the porch. For the first time that afternoon, Harold looked genuinely frightened. Harold stared at me as though I had suddenly begun speaking a foreign language. That is impossible, Cassandra said quickly, glancing from his face to mine. Tell her she is wrong. Harold did not answer. His silence told her more than any explanation ever could. You changed the deed, I said quietly. Your own attorney recommended it. You said it would only be temporary until the business recovered. Harold swallowed. I thought it had been transferred back. You thought. Cassandra's confident smile evaporated. She turned sharply toward him. You told me this house was yours. It was supposed to be. I shook my head. No, Harold. It was supposed to be ours. Neither of them spoke. I walked past the boxes without touching a single one. When I reached the front door, I retrieved my house key. It still fit perfectly. The lock clicked open with the familiar sound I had heard thousands of times across 4 decades. Before stepping inside, I turned back. I will have my attorney review these divorce papers. Then I closed the door gently behind me. For the first time in years, the silence inside the house felt strangely peaceful. I leaned against the hallway wall and released a long breath I had not realized I was holding. My hands trembled. Not because I doubted myself, but because I had finally stopped pretending. 39 years of overlooking small disappointments had led to one enormous betrayal. The kitchen looked exactly as I had left it that morning. My coffee mug still sat in the sink. A shopping list rested on the refrigerator beneath a magnet from Acadia National Park, where Harold and I had always planned a retirement trip. I looked at the magnet for a long moment, then quietly removed it. Some dreams no longer belonged on my refrigerator. A gentle knock came at the back door. Mrs. Alvarez stood there with Grace and Owen. I thought you might need a hug, she said. I smiled. I probably do. She embraced me without asking a single question. Sometimes neighbors who have known you for nearly 3 decades do not require explanations. The children ran into the family room. Mrs. Alvarez lowered her voice. Are you all right? I will be. He studied my face. That is an unusual answer. It surprised me too. He squeezed my hand. If you need anything tonight, call me. I will. After she left, I made grilled cheese sandwiches for the children. Routine has a remarkable way of steadying frightened hearts. Grace finally asked the question she had been holding inside. Grandma, are you and Grandpa angry at each other? I chose my words carefully. Sometimes adults make choices that hurt people. Did Grandpa hurt you? Yes. She looked down at her plate. Will you still be my grandma? I reached across the table and touched her cheek. There is nothing in this world that could ever stop that. She smiled for the first time since we had come home. That smile reminded me exactly why I could not allow bitterness to consume me. The children spent the night in our guest room. Harold never came back. Around 9 that evening my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar Manhattan number. Mrs. Whitfield, Jonathan Pierce said, I wanted to confirm tomorrow morning's appointment. I will be there. There are several documents requiring your signature. We also have Miss Ashworth's personal letter ready for you. His calm professionalism steadied me. After we hung up, I placed the confidential inheritance envelope on my dining room table. For several minutes I simply stared at it. $26 million. An office tower. The words still sounded impossible. Yet somehow they mattered less than they had earlier that afternoon. Money could not buy back trust. It could not erase humiliation. It certainly could not restore a marriage built on promises one person had quietly abandoned. Still, it represented something else. Freedom. The next morning, after Claire picked up the children for summer camp, I drove to the Metro North station and boarded the train into Manhattan. I had made that trip countless times over the years, usually for museum visits or Broadway matinees. This particular morning felt entirely different. As the skyline emerged beyond the Harlem River, I could not help wondering how many times Aunt Margaret had gazed upon these same buildings while quietly deciding my future. The law firm's office occupied the 22nd floor of an elegant building near Bryant Park. Everything inside radiated understated success. Dark wood paneling, fresh flowers, hushed conversations. A receptionist greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Pierce is expecting you." Jonathan Pierce appeared to be in his late 50s, dressed in a charcoal suit with kind eyes behind thin wire-framed glasses. He shook my hand. "My condolences again for your loss." "Thank you." He led me into a spacious conference room overlooking Midtown. Several neatly organized folders waited on the polished table. "So," he said with a gentle smile, "shall we introduce you to your new responsibilities?" The next 2 hours passed in a blur of signatures, explanations, and astonishing figures. Aunt Margaret's estate was even more meticulously organized than I had imagined. The Midtown office tower had been fully restored years earlier and was nearly completely leased to law firms, architecture practices, and nonprofit organizations. Its rental income alone generated several million annually. The $26 million was not sitting in stacks of cash, of course. It consisted of investment accounts, municipal bonds, certificates of deposit, and carefully managed funds designed to provide long-term stability. Then came the charitable foundation. It funded literacy initiatives, housing assistance for seniors, scholarships, and neighborhood libraries across New York State. I smiled. She supported libraries. Mr. Pierce smiled back warmly. That somehow made perfect sense. Finally, he opened one last folder. "This is Miss Ashworth's personal letter." The envelope had my name written across it in elegant blue ink. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded the pages. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "Dear Ellie, if you are reading this, then I have finally run out of time. You may wonder why I chose you. The answer is surprisingly simple." I watched. I frowned. Watched. Mr. Pierce nodded. "She anticipated that sentence would surprise you." I continued reading. "A family does not reveal itself during holidays or weddings. It reveals itself during ordinary Tuesdays. I watched you visit your grandmother when others found excuses. I watched you quietly help your neighbors. I watched you support your husband without ever demanding recognition. I even visited your library several times over the past decade." Tears blurred the page. I had no idea. Money magnifies character. It does not create it. The wrong relatives wanted my buildings. You never wanted anything. That is precisely why you deserve them. By the time I reached the final paragraph, I was crying openly. Mr. Pierce respectfully looked out the window until I finished. I had no idea she knew me that well. "Oh," he said softly, "she knew you remarkably well." He slid another folder toward me. "There is one matter we should discuss." "What is it?" "Given the size of your inheritance, privacy will be important. News of the estate settlement will eventually become public." "I understand. I would recommend saying as little as possible until you are ready." I nodded. There was one more secret I intended to keep. Harold still had no idea that while he believed he was divorcing a woman with modest savings, he had actually walked away from someone whose life had changed forever. And I was not entirely sure yet whether that knowledge would ever come from me. The first thing I did after leaving Jonathan Pierce's office was not shopping. It was not touring luxury apartments overlooking Central Park. It certainly was not purchasing an expensive handbag or making reservations at a five-star restaurant. I walked 3 blocks to a quiet diner, ordered a cup of coffee and a turkey sandwich, and opened a yellow legal pad. For 39 years, I had been the woman who planned everything from grocery budgets to holiday dinners, from children's college applications to payroll schedules during Harold's leanest years. Now I had an entirely different future to organize. I wrote one sentence across the top of the page. Do not let money change who you are. Then I underlined it twice. That piece of paper stayed inside my purse for the entire following year. It became my compass whenever life threatened to spin too quickly. The following weeks passed in a blur of attorneys, accountants, and meetings. I learned more about commercial real estate than I ever imagined I would. The building Aunt Margaret had left me was not merely another office tower. It had stood in Midtown Manhattan for nearly a century. Its limestone facade had survived wars, recessions, blackouts, and financial crises. Thousands of people walked through its revolving doors every weekday without ever knowing the quiet woman who now owned it. Every time I visited, I felt less like an owner and more like a caretaker. That suited me perfectly fine. The property manager, Marcus Delgado, had worked there for 21 years. I have met a lot of building owners, he told me during one tour. They usually ask one question. What question? How much money can this place make? And I did not. He smiled. You asked where the tenants eat lunch. I laughed. I suppose I did. You also asked which employees had worked here the longest. People matter. He nodded approvingly. I think Miss Ashworth chose well. Instead of replacing experienced staff, I listened to them. Instead of raising rents dramatically, I approved gradual improvements that benefited tenants and employees alike. The lobby received better lighting and more comfortable seating. The elevators were modernized. The aging heating system was replaced before another harsh New York winter arrived. Small decisions, practical decisions, the kind of choices Aunt Margaret herself likely would have made. Meanwhile, the charitable foundation held its first board meeting with me serving as chairwoman. I was nervous walking into that conference room. Most of the board members had known Aunt Margaret for decades. Would they view me as an outsider? Instead, they welcomed me warmly. One gentleman in his 70s smiled. Margaret always trusted her instincts. Another added, if she chose you, we are interested in hearing your ideas. My ideas were simple. Expand literacy programs. Increase scholarships for community colleges and trade schools. Support libraries in underserved neighborhoods. Create grants for senior housing initiatives. None of those proposals made newspaper headlines, but they changed lives. Claire eventually agreed to leave her private practice and become the foundation's executive director. I do not know if I am qualified, she admitted. You have spent your entire career helping people recover, I told her. That is exactly what this foundation does. She accepted. Watching my daughter walk into meaningful work filled me with a pride no amount of money could ever equal. Daniel became an educational advisor for the scholarship program. His experience as a public school teacher proved invaluable. I know exactly which students fall through the cracks, he said during one planning session. Then let us build something sturdy enough to catch them. He smiled. You sound like Dad talking about construction. The comment caught both of us off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I answered softly, I hope I am building something sturdier. At home, life remained complicated. Harold had moved into a condominium across town. Communication happened almost entirely through attorneys. His lawyer repeatedly requested that I vacate the family home while divorce negotiations continued. My attorney simply responded with copies of the property deed. The request stopped. Then another surprise arrived. My attorney, Grace Bellamy, asked me to meet with a forensic accountant. I think you will want to hear this in person, she said. The accountant spread several financial statements across a conference table. I have reviewed your husband's business records, and there are significant irregularities. He pointed toward highlighted transactions. Corporate funds had paid for luxury vacations, jewelry purchases, a leased sports car, thousands of dollars in restaurant charges, all connected to Cassandra. I stared at the paperwork. I thought Harold was paying for those personally. So did he. What do you mean? The company paid. He slid another document toward me. There are also undisclosed investment accounts. My stomach tightened. Hidden from me and potentially from tax authorities as well. The room suddenly seemed smaller. My marriage had not ended simply because Harold fell in love with someone else. It had been quietly unraveling beneath my feet long before I ever realized it. There were missing funds, questionable bookkeeping, contracts that appeared unusually favorable to certain subcontractors. The accountant looked at me carefully. Mrs. Whitfield, I want to be clear. I appreciate that. We are not accusing anyone of crimes. No, but these records deserve closer examination. I nodded slowly. Then let the records speak for themselves. That became my approach. No anonymous phone calls, no revenge schemes, no public accusations. If Harold had broken laws, the truth would emerge through the proper channels. I had no desire to destroy him. I simply refused to protect him any longer. Several months later, local business news finally announced that Aunt Margaret Ashworth's estate had officially been settled. The mystery was no longer a mystery. My photograph appeared beside an article describing the foundation's expanded community initiatives. The headline was not about wealth. It focused on literacy grants and scholarships. I appreciated that. Late that afternoon my cell phone rang. Harold. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later another call came. Then another. Finally I listened. Ellie. Your voice sounded unlike any I had ever heard before. You inherited Margaret Ashworth's estate. I said nothing. He continued. I just saw the news. Another long silence. I did not know. No, I whispered to the empty room. You did not. The next voicemail arrived from Cassandra. Her tone was dramatically different from the woman who had stood on my porch. Margaret, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I almost smiled. The wrong foot. That was certainly one way to describe telling a 61-year-old grandmother to pack her bags. She continued, I would really love to meet for coffee. I deleted the message before it finished. The following week Harold began sending handwritten letters, not emails, not text messages, actual letters. He apologized for being distant. He admitted he had handled everything poorly. He wrote that 39 years could not simply be erased. For the first time in months I cried not because I wanted him back but because I finally understood something painful. He had not written those letters when he believed I was an ordinary retired librarian. He wrote them only after discovering I owned a Manhattan skyscraper. That realization ended the last fragile thread of hope I had not even known was still hanging on. Money had not changed me. It had simply revealed everyone else. The first snow of December arrived earlier than expected. I stood in my kitchen watching soft white flakes settle across the backyard, the same backyard where Harold had once taught Daniel to throw a baseball, and where Claire had insisted every snowman needed a proper scarf. It was strange how a single place could hold beautiful memories and painful ones without asking permission. The divorce was finalized just before Christmas. There was no courtroom drama, no shouting, no dramatic speeches. Only the quiet signatures of a judge and the gentle ending of a marriage that had lasted nearly 40 years. When I walked out of the courthouse I felt lighter than I had in a very long time. Not happy. Healing is not the same thing as happiness. But free. The forensic accountant's findings continued moving through the proper legal channels. Several months later Grace Bellamy called. I thought you should hear this from me before it reaches the newspapers. I sat down at my dining room table. What happened? Federal auditors have opened a formal review of Harold's company. I closed my eyes. So it begins. The investigation was not started because of anything you did, she reminded me. I knew that. The accounting discrepancies had eventually reached the attention of regulators through routine legal disclosures connected to the divorce proceedings and corporate filings. No anonymous tips, no secret revenge, just paperwork. Sometimes the truth does not need help. It simply needs daylight. By spring, local business publications began reporting that Harold's construction company was facing serious financial trouble. Several commercial projects had stalled. Banks tightened lending. Longtime clients quietly took their business elsewhere. Then came civil lawsuits from subcontractors claiming unpaid invoices. One morning Daniel called. Mom, are you sitting down? I am now. The company filed for bankruptcy protection. I was silent for several moments. That business had once been our shared dream. I had watched it grow from a single pickup truck and a folding card table into a respected regional contractor. Seeing it collapse felt strangely similar to watching an old family home being demolished. Necessary perhaps, but still heartbreaking. I never wanted this, I admitted. I know, Daniel said gently. You just stopped carrying it. His words stayed with me for a long time. A week later, another piece of news spread through town. Cassandra had left Harold. Not quietly either. One of Claire's friends who worked in commercial real estate reluctantly mentioned that Cassandra had been seen attending charity galas with another developer, this one from Connecticut, who apparently owned several luxury apartment complexes. Claire hesitated before telling me. I was not sure you wanted to know. I appreciate your honesty. Does it make you feel satisfied? I thought carefully before answering. No. She looked surprised. I do not enjoy watching people discover that selfish choices have consequences. But she hurt you. Yes. And Dad. Yes. I poured us both another cup of tea. Claire, revenge sounds thrilling in stories. She smiled faintly. But in real life it usually arrives looking a great deal like sadness. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I am proud of you. I have made plenty of mistakes. Not this time. Several weeks later my phone rang again. Harold. This time I answered. Hello. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. Ellie, would you meet me? I hesitated. I do not think that is wise. Please. There was a long silence. I do not want anything. Another pause. I just want one honest conversation. I agreed. We met at a small diner halfway between our two homes. It was not an expensive place. In fact, we had eaten there many Saturday mornings during the early years of our marriage, back when pancakes cost less than $2. The waitress recognized us immediately. Haven't seen you two together in a while. Harold forced a smile. It has been some time. She poured coffee and politely left us alone. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Age had changed Harold over the past year. His shoulders seemed lower. His hair had turned almost entirely gray. The confidence that once filled every room had quietly disappeared. Finally, he looked at me. I am sorry. I waited. No excuses followed. No explanations. Just those two words. I am sorry for all of it. I folded my hands around my coffee cup. Go on. I thought success meant never looking back. His eyes filled with tears. I kept chasing bigger contracts, bigger houses, bigger everything. He shook his head. I stopped noticing the people who made any of it possible. I listened. I convinced myself you would always be there. Another silence. I confused loyalty with weakness. That sentence hurt more than everything else he had said. Because it was true. He looked down at the table. When Cassandra came along, he sighed. She admired the version of me I wanted to believe existed. The successful businessman. Exactly. And I enjoyed being admired. He laughed bitterly. Turns out she admired my money even more. Neither of us smiled. I deserved that lesson. I watched steam rise from my coffee. You know what surprised me most? He looked up. You never tried to ruin me. I did not need to. I know. His voice cracked. You simply stopped protecting me. There was the truth. For decades I had quietly solved problems before they ever reached him. Balanced accounts, smoothed relationships, made excuses, covered mistakes. When I stopped doing those things he finally had to face himself. I have had a lot of time to think, he continued. I keep remembering little things. Like what? The nights you stayed awake doing payroll. The birthday you canceled because one of my employees needed emergency surgery. He smiled sadly. I do not think I thanked you even once. You did not. I am thanking you now. I nodded. Thank you. Those words were nearly 4 decades late, but they were sincere. Harold took a deep breath. I do not expect another chance. There isn't one. I know. I have forgiven you. He looked startled. You have. Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I spoke slowly, choosing every word with care. I refuse to carry bitterness for the rest of my life. He wiped his eyes. But I also will not pretend trust can be rebuilt after what happened. He nodded. I understand. I truly hope you build a peaceful life. I will try. As we stood to leave, he hesitated. Ellie. Yes. I always thought inheriting millions made you the richest person in the room. He looked directly at me. I was wrong. Before I could answer, he quietly added, you were richer than me long before your aunt ever wrote that will. He walked out into the afternoon sunshine alone. I watched him cross the parking lot with slower steps than I remembered. For the first time since everything had happened, I did not see an enemy. I saw an aging man who had traded away the best parts of his life before ever recognizing their value. That was not a victory. It was simply the truth. And somehow the truth was enough. A year after I stood on my front porch with divorce papers in one hand and the biggest secret of my life in the other, I found myself standing on the rooftop terrace of the Manhattan building Aunt Margaret had entrusted to me. The city stretched out in every direction. Yellow taxis drifted through the streets below like tiny moving pieces on a game board. The afternoon sun reflected off glass towers while older brick buildings reminded me that New York had always found a way to blend yesterday with tomorrow. I rested my hands on the stone railing. For a long moment I simply breathed. When I first inherited this building I thought it represented wealth. Now I understood it represented responsibility. Money can change your address. Character determines whether people are glad you arrived. The foundation had completed its first full year under my leadership. Instead of shrinking, it had grown. We expanded literacy programs to dozens of libraries across New York State. We created scholarships for students attending community colleges, trade schools, and nursing programs. We partnered with organizations that repaired homes for low-income seniors, helping older Americans remain safely in the neighborhoods they had spent their lives building. One of my favorite projects involved converting an unused floor of the office building into a nonprofit resource center. Every week, veterans met there for employment counseling. Senior citizens attended free financial planning workshops. Small community organizations finally had affordable meeting space in Midtown. Whenever I walked through those halls and heard people laughing over coffee, I thought about Aunt Margaret. She had understood something many wealthy people never do. Buildings are only valuable because people fill them with purpose. Claire flourished as executive director of the foundation. Watching her confidence grow was one of the greatest joys of my life. She no longer worried about making mortgage payments every month. Instead, she spent her days helping other families find opportunities they never imagined possible. One evening, she stopped by my house after work carrying a stack of scholarship applications. She smiled. "Mom, do you realize we have awarded more than 200 scholarships this year?" I smiled back. "I was hoping you would tell me that." She laughed. "You always pretend you do not already know the numbers. I like hearing you say them." She sat beside me at the kitchen table. "I think Aunt Margaret would be proud." "I hope so." Daniel continued teaching literature at the same public high school. Despite my encouragement, he refused to leave the classroom. "Mom," he said one afternoon, "some jobs are not supposed to make you rich." "I know. They are supposed to make you useful." He agreed to oversee the foundation's educational partnerships, but only on evenings and weekends. "My students still need me Monday morning," he insisted. I could not have been prouder. As for Harold, life had become much quieter. After losing his company, he accepted a volunteer position with a nonprofit organization that helped seniors navigate housing and financial challenges after retirement. When I first heard about it, I smiled. He had spent decades building office buildings. Now he spent his days helping older people keep roofs over their heads. There was something fitting about that. Family gatherings gradually became less awkward. The first Thanksgiving was difficult. Everyone measured every conversation carefully. The second felt easier. By Christmas, the grandchildren had stopped worrying about where everyone should sit. Children often lead adults back toward normalcy. The following spring, Claire hosted a birthday party for Owen, who had just turned 11. The backyard overflowed with balloons, folding chairs, hamburgers on the grill, and grandchildren chasing one another through the grass. Harold arrived carrying a carefully wrapped present. He looked at me across the yard. I smiled politely. He smiled back. No bitterness. No pretending the past had not happened. Simply two older people who understood that peace sometimes looks different than the future they once imagined. Later that afternoon, Grace, now 12, wandered over while I sat beneath the maple tree. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart." She leaned against my shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Were you ever really angry at Grandpa?" I looked across the yard. Harold was helping Owen assemble a new telescope. He laughed as the boy accidentally pointed it backward. For a long moment I watched them. Then I answered honestly. "Yes. Really angry. Very." "What changed?" I thought carefully before speaking. If I had stayed angry forever, I would have let his mistakes keep controlling my life. She considered that. So forgiving someone is not saying what they did was okay. No. It is saying you will not let what they did decide who you become. She nodded slowly. I think I understand. I hope you will not need that lesson for many years. He hugged me. I will remember it anyway. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I found Aunt Margaret's letter in my desk drawer. The paper had become slightly worn from being read so many times. One sentence still stood out above all the others. Money magnifies character. It does not create it. She had been right. Harold's money had magnified his pride. Cassandra's ambitions had magnified her greed. My inheritance had simply magnified the values I had spent a lifetime trying to live by. Wealth had not rescued me. It had simply given me more opportunities to become the person I already wanted to be. As the sun began setting, I drove into Manhattan one last time that evening. I rode the elevator to the top floor of the building and stepped onto the rooftop terrace. The sky glowed with shades of orange and soft lavender. Far below, millions of people hurried through another ordinary day. I smiled. A year earlier, I thought the greatest blessing I had received was $26 million and a skyscraper. I could not have been more mistaken. The greatest blessing was discovering that my worth had never depended on my husband's opinion, my bank account, or anyone else's approval. It came from the quiet choices I had made over a lifetime. The choices to work hard, to love deeply, to forgive without forgetting, to protect my family, to remain kind without becoming naive. Those choices became the richest inheritance of all. If my story has stayed with you, I hope you will take a moment to think about the people in your own life who have quietly stood beside you through the ordinary years. Sometimes they are the true treasures we do not fully appreciate until life tests us. And if this journey meant something to you, I would love for you to share your thoughts. Pass this story along to someone who might need it, and subscribe for more stories about resilience, second chances, and the quiet strength that often comes with growing older. Thank you for spending this time with me.